I told you that you've been playing Crow wrong this entire time? This video features the best tips and tricks to help you play the most toxic assassin in Brawl Stars, Crow.
I smell a rat!
Alright, so to start off this guy, let's go to talk about Crow's main attack, Switchblade. Crow throws 3 long-range daggers simultaneously with a slight spread. These daggers damage enemies upon contact while also inflicting poison to enemies over time. Poison enemies take 4 ticks of damage equal to 25% of Crow's attack damage every second. Hitting an enemy that is already poisoned will refresh the poison to deal damage 4 more times. Now, due to Crow's very fast unload speed and very fast reload speed, he can actually unload his ammo relatively frequently. This allows him to constantly apply poison and regular damage on the enemies, preventing them from healing and charging up his super all the while. Now, one of the more annoying things about playing Crow is that when you are poisoned by Crow, it delays auto regeneration by an additional 4 seconds. Since it takes about 3 seconds for auto regeneration to kick in, this will raise the required time for auto regeneration to be about 7 seconds instead. Now, another thing that you can use Crow's main attacks for is to kind of scout bushes, so if the enemies are poisonous inside the bushes, there's no way they can heal up and hide. For this specific reason, Crow is a great poker that can finish off low health enemies or just continuously prevent isolated brawlers from healing up and force them to retreat. Now, speaking of poking with the enemies, you have to take advantage that Crow actually has a pretty long main attack range, so take advantage of that as well when needing to chip down the enemies. I'd recommend just attacking from a distance and backing off to chip away at an enemy's health to charge up his super. Although poking deals only moderate damage each time, poking will slowly defeat the enemy and hinder any healing. But okay, that's gonna be it for Crow's main attack. Let's go to talk about his super swoop. Crow jumps into the air and throws 14 daggers around him that spread out as they travel. He then lands, firing another set of 14 daggers around him upon landing. Now, one way to use Crow's super is to use it as an assassination tool. Once a brawler is on low health because of the poison, he can jump onto them for a quick defeat. Also, because the daggers fly out around him when he lands, you should position yourself to land on top of an enemy. Now, like I just stated, if you're going to be jumping on top of an enemy and landing directly on them, you might as well just go all out so you can do the most amount of damage possible. You want as much of those poison daggers to be hitting the enemy that you can, so when you land, all 14 daggers will be shot through the enemy, dealing the maximum amount of damage as possible. Now, if you ever plan on using your super on a stationary target like the high save for example, start by standing directly on top of it and then just jump straight up in the air. Now, another effective way you can use Crow's super is as a viable escape option. Let's just say theoretically you're low on health and the enemies are slowly approaching you, you can use his super to fly away and escape while also dealing damage to the enemies. I will always preach this, that it's better to stay alive in a match even if it means using your super to maintain pressure while your team is struggling to win their lanes. But okay, that's gonna be it for his super. Let's go to talk about his gadgets, but the first one I want to talk about is gonna be Defense Booster. With this gadget, Crow gains a 3-second shield that reduces all damage he takes by 40%. Now, remember when I was just talking about when you're jumping on top of the enemies with his super, you might as well land directly on top of them? Yeah, this gadget is gonna be paired perfectly with that kind of strategy. Just think about it, you can activate your gadget first and then jump into the enemies, so maybe it could increase your chances of survival when landing on your target. This will be extremely helpful, especially when you're planning on jumping like higher HP brawlers or just brawlers that do a lot of damage at a close range. Now, let's just say you're trying to maintain control on a specific part of the map and you know that you're about to be pressured hard by the enemies. Go ahead and use this gadget to keep yourself alive. You can preemptively use your gadget to stay alive while you try to hold down your lane and stand your ground to complete whatever the objective may be in the game. And you guys are probably like, Brent, when should I be activating this gadget in the first place outside of those specific scenarios? Well, a good rule of thumb is to actually activate this gadget when you have probably a third or a fourth of your remaining health left. The reason I say this is especially if you are in a 1v1 and the enemy is outranging you, or they just do more DPS at a mid-range, this gadget could potentially save your life because 40% damage reduction is a lot more than people think. But okay, that's gonna be it for Defense Booster. Let's go to talk about his other gadget, Slowing Toxin. With this gadget, Crow slows all currently poisoned enemies for 2 seconds, even the enemies that are out of Crow's vision. The slow lasts for 2 seconds even if the poison wears off sooner. Now, if you plan on using this gadget inside of 3v3s, try to poison multiple enemies first before activating this gadget. For the best use, poison all 3 of the enemies if possible, and then use the gadget to slow down all the enemies to make it way easier for team wipes. Now, let's just say for example you have only one enemy slow down and they're like far away from you, running out of your attack range. Just go ahead and use the gadget to slow them down so you can catch up to them. Crow already has a good reload speed and a decent movement movement speed, so if you can slow them down with the slowing toxic gadget, they will have no shot escaping his daggers. Now yes, this gadget is going to be great when needing to slow down enemies that are outside of your attack range, but if there's enemies that are just within your attack range and you need to slow them down, just go ahead and use it too. Especially if they have some kind of ability where they can dash, jump away, or just move away quicker in general, just go ahead and use the gadget to prevent them from escaping your reach. Now the most fun time when you should be using this gadget is when you already outrange the enemy and they can't catch up to you. Then you should go ahead and just slow them down to frustrate them even more. You can get some easy damage off to help you charge up your super by slowing down an enemy that you already outrange. I mean, you're just basically toying with them at that point. But okay, that's gonna be it for his gadgets. Let's go to talk about his star powers, but the first one I want to talk about is gonna be Carrion Crow. With this star power, if an enemy has less than 50% of their maximum health, Crow deals 256 extra damage per dagger to the enemy, and the poison also deals 64 extra damage. The effect is lost if the enemy heals back above 50% health. Now if you're playing against brawlers that don't really deal a lot of damage per second but they have a lot of health, I definitely recommend using the star power in those kind of scenarios. For example, brawlers like Pam who have a lot of health but doesn't deal a lot of damage unless she's like super close to you, they are the perfect targets for Crow to pick on when using the star power. I'd also recommend using the star power when you know you are playing with good teammates, because if they can lower down the enemy for you, hey, that's just the easy work done for you, and all you gotta do is just chip them down and get that extra 256 damage each time. I would recommend having your teammates lower down the enemies for you, especially if they have a higher damage output than you, and then all you gotta do is just swoop in, deal the damage, and finish off the enemies. But just in general, if you can pick a lane and target a brawler that can't outrange you, you should have no problem already dealing enough damage to lower them below 50% health. The Carrion Crow star power shines in 1v1 engagements, especially if you counter brawlers like Squeak, Max, Leon, and Shelly. These are just some of the brawlers that Crow can hard counter, and they will not have a single shot at killing you once they drop below 50% health. But okay, that's gonna be for Carrion Crow. Let's go to talk about his other star power, Extra Toxic. With this star power, Crow's daggers apply an attack debuff, decreasing the damage output of a poison enemy by 15%. Now for the longest time, this was undisputedly the better star power to use with Crow, but I mean, it's still really good despite all the nerfs. It just gave your team a huge advantage by basically decreasing the amount of damage the enemies did, so it made it easier to survive any incoming damage whatsoever. Now when I recommend using this star power over Carrion Crow is when you're playing against mid to long range brawlers that can easily outrange and out DPS Crow. For example, you need to debuff brawlers like Ems, Lola, Griff, and Pearl, just to name a few, because all of these brawlers shine at the mid range. They will easily be able to out DPS Crow, so affecting them with Extra Toxic is huge for you and your team. Now since the attack debuff from this star power is only working when the enemy is poisoned, you gotta just try your best to have the enemy constantly poisoned throughout the match. Theoretically, you should be doing this anyway with Crow to prevent the enemies from healing up, but it's even more important when you have an advantage in damage, or even more especially in rare scenarios like mirror matchups. Now I got this comment a lot in my old Crow guide. People ask me, Bren, which star power is better, you know, because that Crow guide is old, so which one should you guys be using overall? Just a little bit of a recap, I'd recommend going Carrion Crow if you're pulling against brawlers that don't deal a lot of damage per second but have a lot of health. For example, brawlers like Pam or just higher HP tanks that don't deal a lot of damage, those are the kind of targets you need to pick on with this star power. As far as Extra Toxic, I'd recommend using this when you're pulling against brawlers at the mid to long range that deal very high DPS. Brawlers like Ems, Lola, and Griff are the kind of brawlers you need to be debuffing because they can just outrange and out DPS Crow no problem. So which star power is going to be better in general to use? The answer to that is going to be with that debate out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about his Mythic Gear, Enduring Toxins. With this gear equipped, if there aren't any outside damage or rebuffs, Crow's poison damage from his main attack and super will be increased by 30%. I really recommend using this Mythic Gear because it just makes Crow that much more annoying to deal with when the poison is dealing 30% more damage. This may not seem like a lot to some people, like, oh, now the enemy takes a few hundred damage a second, what's the big deal? But every single amount of health matters. If you can keep that enemy constantly poisoned, the damage they take for those 4 seconds will stack up and force the enemies to play way more passively. Think about it this way, if you are ticking down the enemy quicker with the passive poison damage from the daggers, the enemies will have no choice but to retreat and disengage completely much faster than usual, and this could ultimately lead to more area control and more games won. But okay, that's gonna be his Mythic Gear. Now let's go to talk about his Hypercharged utility knives. When activated, daggers from Crow's super now return to him after reaching their maximum range. This effect applies to daggers fired when jumping jumping and landing. However, the daggers can't travel through walls and they will respawn upon hitting them. Crow also gains a 24% speed boost, a 25% damage boost, as well as a 5% shield boost. Now him getting his hypercharge was one of the main reasons why I wanted to make an updated guide, because in my old Crow guide I didn't even get to talk about it, wasn't even out yet. And now that they actually buffed his hypercharge charge rate where it's much easier to get, I definitely recommend you guys getting his hypercharge now. The same rules and tips apply when I talked about using Crow's super. Just make sure you can at least land on the ground so that the daggers will come back and pierce through the initial target that you were going for. If you want to see the true power of this hypercharge, watch how quickly you can destroy the big bot, which has 100,000 health. Well, there you guys go, a 2024 updated pro guide on how to play Crow. Go ahead and let me know in the comments down below, how many trophies do you have on your Crow? Well, anyway guys, if you guys enjoyed that brawler guide, I highly recommend you guys go check out this brawler guide right here.